Hey, what's up? Shikaraganai again, and today we're going to do another video in our series for Intel Bytez, where I go over some cyber threat intelligence topics and some privacy-related things, and we discuss current events that are happening as far as cyber threat intel goes, osint, that kind of thing. And today we're going to do one based off of the new Kayesa, I think that's how you say it, attack that happened for ransomware over the weekend, the 4th of July weekend. And I'm going to try to do more videos of things that are kind of current. I'll try to keep them fairly timely, but it may be like a day or two later after analysis has been done where I can kind of explain, hey, this is kind of what's going on, because a lot of times people don't want to dig through all the different documentation about the details of it, but there are things to be gleaned from some of these attacks that will help you and your company as far as defending for any future problems that are happening. So it's always good to understand how previous attacks worked so that you can kind of see a pattern, you can kind of understand the priority of what you need to focus on. For example, when it comes to ransomware, of course, that's the soup du jour of the day. The major thing that we see like every single time is that the ransomware attacks will kick off with a social engineered phish of some sort. Typically, I mean, that's what we normally see overwhelmingly. So therefore, in your brain, for the company that you work for, the priority would be the social engineering training or phishing simulators from companies like KnowBe4 or something like that, where you can implement phishing simulators in your Outlook, web access, that sort of thing. That's where you glean from those sort of things. And this particular attack, this ransomware one, had some common things that we see lately, which is the living off the land binary stuff. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through it. So when it comes to the ransomware stuff, the philosophy, in case you weren't aware of ransomware attacks, is they don't want to destroy your data. They don't want to delete it. They want to mangle it in such a way that you can't retrieve it. And the only way you can retrieve it is with a key that they have that you'll be able to unlock. And they're just basically using it for ransom. It's kind of like if you had hostages and you started killing all of them. Well, you have no leverage as a bad guy because you don't have any more hostages. This is the same mindset. Is they don't want to go in there and delete all your files and do this and that. They want to make them so they're inaccessible for you to be able to go ahead and have something that you need to pay for and say, hey, I need to get my data back. The second thing that they do now, what they term as double extortion, is essentially they'll do both that, and the second thing is they'll already have the data that before they encrypted it already pulled off, and they'll sell that. And so if you don't pay the ransom stuff for the decryption of your files because you did proper backups, then they'll go to the second one, which says, okay, well, I got your data and I'm going to sell it on the dark web, that sort of thing, right? And we see a lot of that lately with all these different attacks. Now, the reason and why for that is because, again, if you're doing proper backups, and by proper backups, I'm talking about like the 3-2-1 principle, if you've never heard of it before, where they say do 3 copies of your data. 2 would be symbolized in 2 different mediums, and also, online, 2 online and 1 offline. So the 3 would be the 3 copies, 2 would be the medium types, and then 1 would be the offsite backup. Now, the reason for that, and typically they're going to use like tape backup, yeah, that's still a thing. And the reason they do that is because with ransomware, people seem to think well, let me just rephrase that. Some people that I've talked to seem to think it's an attack that just happened right now, this day, or whatever. In reality, though, these attackers that do the ransomware stuff will be in your system maybe 6 months, maybe longer, prior to the actual ransomware attack, because they're learning where all your backups go. They're learning all the different devices that you're using, and they will then set it up in their code to look for those paths as well. So therefore, if you only relied on online backups, they would have already gleaned that information of where those are, and they'll go ahead and encrypt those as well when the actual attack happens. So not only will it encrypt all your regular files that they normally included, but they're going to encrypt your backups as well, so that you have no other choice but to either rebuild the entire system or pay them the money, which is why offsite backups are very, very important. So if you have some dude shuttling it over to, I don't know, some mountain I don't know what they call them, Steel Mountain. What was the one from Mr. Robot? I can't remember. Anyways, a physical location where you physically have a tape backup being physically put in a van and physically drove to this particular location. That is considered an off-site backup. Do not think of cloud as an off-site backup because, again, it is still online. It is still connected to the internet, and there's still paths that can be made there. And if they've compromised credentials to log into your AWS or whatever, they can encrypt those as well. So don't think of that. Think of a physical location where you're doing off-site backups. Now, it is a little difficult in your planning in regards to that because you're not going to probably efficiently back up enough data in very small pockets of time doing off-site. Typically, these may be maybe once a week. If you're critical systems, I would assume probably you're doing it every day, but some companies may just do it once a week and then send over to. So therefore, if you decide not to pay a ransom and you need to restore from an offsite backup, it is going to only have a certain amount of times data. Okay, and so depending on how crucial your system is in your data, you need to devise a plan that's a good balance for your offsite backup of how many times you're going to do it per the week. And so that when you do restore, it's hopefully as close to what you have for real-time data as you can get it. But the key thing, again, is off-site backups. If you're not doing those, you're probably screwed because I'm telling you, it's going to happen that when the ransomware attack happens, they're going to encrypt your online backups. So don't rely on just your online backup stuff. And I'm guessing from the number of different attacks I've seen, ransomware attacks on the news lately, and all of these people paying, I'm assuming they're not doing those proper backups because if I had an offsite backup and it was, I don't know, let's just say within the last half hour, and then I got this note saying, hey, we're going to, unless you pay me $70 million, we're going to, not give you your data back, I'm going to say, screw you, I don't really care. I've got my backup, bro. I'll just go ahead and restore everything from backup. It doesn't bother me to that extent. Now, it would bother me that they may possibly have my data that would be then sold on the dark web. That portion is a little bit different. But when it comes to your backups, it's important that you have off-site backups. Now, here's the other important thing that a lot of companies forget and miss is you need to test restore of these backups, okay, on a very regular basis. If you don't test restore these backups, you're going on the assumption that your backup did it properly and worked. But there are some times where these things are corrupted and they don't actually restore properly. You wouldn't know that. Plus, if you are involved with a bunch of SLAs with some different clients that you're actually working with for their customer data, they're going to want to be back up and running as quickly as possible. And you've seen with these ransomware attacks, some of these companies are down for a week, maybe more. As they're restoring all their information back, customers are going to start looking elsewhere to where they can actually do business instead of your company. So you want to make sure you have a good idea mentally of knowing on documented paper here, how long does it actually take me to do a restore of critical functions, what they call business criticality. So things to make sure the business still keeps rolling. How long will it take me to restore from a tape off-site backup and record that and document it for your plan and say, okay, I do understand if we do get hit by ransomware, it will take me blah, blah, blah amount of time to restore from the backup. And I've done a restore test once a week or what have you. I'm seeing in a lot of cases, more than likely, is that a lot of people aren't testing their backups on a regular basis. They're just kind of hoping and just going on the assumption that the backups will work. Well, it's not always the case. I mean, you're going to be screwed if you get to the point where you say, well, we'll restore our backup. We're not going to pay ransomware. And all of a sudden, bing, it doesn't restore because we never did a test of it, so we don't know that it's corrupted data. Now you're stuck with the fact of either paying the ransom or rebuilding the entirety of it from scratch. So remember those things when you're doing your backups. So two major things when it comes to the ransomware stuff: social engineering training, right, for your company, and then the backups. And do your testing of the restore of those backups, and don't forget about the offsite. All right, enough of that. Let's get into the actual Kayesa one, and let's talk a little bit about this. So the Kaseya, I think I'm saying that right, is a software that is used for monitoring and management. And typically when you buy or pay for what's called an MSP, a managed service provider, they're going to go ahead and be inserted into your network, and they're going to be having different agents that are monitoring such your network, so that if anything comes through that's security related, they'll be able to go ahead and alert you as an incident response team or a SOC. And it's typically bought because they may not have the staff on hand to be around the clock 24/7 monitoring the actual network, so they rely on these MSPs to do the alerting and the triage during these off-site or off-hour times. And typically during the workday, they have their regular incident response team monitoring these as well. So typically, this is nothing new that an MSP would use software like this. Not every MSP does, but apparently it's I guess it's popular enough where there's quite a few of them, because it was a pretty wide reach on this particular attack. So essentially, this particular software here had a bug in it, apparently a 0-day. Some are saying it's a SQL injection flaw, or I think it was an authentication logic flaw in the code that actually was able to be compromised, and from there it kind of infected it. The name that keeps getting bantered around, or the term that keeps getting bantered around, is supply chain compromise. And it harkens back to that SolarWinds thing. So the basic idea of what a supply chain compromise is instead of attacking the customer directly, they'll attack the vendors that provide software to the customer. So it kind of says, okay, if I infect this guy that does the vendor for, we'll say like in SolarWinds case. In SolarWinds, they had that, what was it called? Orion software, I think it was. So there are customers that set auto update to get this Orion software to be updated or whatever. So instead of infecting the actual customer themselves, what they would do is they inserted a backdoor into the build process of the update. So when the update was actually built, from my understanding, this is how it worked, is that in I think it was either Jenkins or whatever they used for the build tool, when the actual update was built, it had the backdoor already in it. And in this particular case, when that gets pushed out to customers, that includes the backdoor. And then from there, they'll basically make a botnet out of all the different customers and such. That's why the SolarWinds was such a nasty one, because of that. Because they actually compromised SolarWinds' actual software, the update, whatever. In this case, that got pushed out. Now, recently, I guess yesterday, I was reading some stuff where the executives here at Kaseya are saying this is not necessarily a supply chain attack, because they don't see indications that their actual source code was manipulated or attacked in this case here, which is kind of odd. But I'm guessing then, if that's the case, and they're not saying that it's not that, I'm assuming then that the VSA servers that are being run by the MSP themselves have the bug, and so the attackers are attacking that particular bug per MSP. And then from there, the MSP would then infect the customer in that sense there. So, I mean, it still is kind of a supply chain compromise, if that's true, if that's what they're saying. But that was the latest update I heard. I think it was yesterday from them. Anyways, so with this particular deal here, what was kind of interesting is it's apparent they have some sort of bug bounty program or something over there at Kaseya, because they did have a vulnerability disclosure from a Dutch Institute of Vulnerability Disclosure. And apparently they had already found this particular bug, this particular vulnerability, and they already disclosed it to Kaseya. And in this particular case, Kaseya was in the process of actually putting out a fix for that, but they were too late. So the timing was everything, which it's kind of odd that, I guess you could say fingers may point to some of the researchers or some buddies of the researchers that may have tipped them off, who knows, but the timing was kind of odd on that, right? Where before they could validate the patch, so in other words, they knew about this before it was a thing, but the bad guys got to them first, and they ended up compromising that, and from there, it just went off to the races. So that was kind of interesting on that one there, that they already had that. Now, the team over at Huntress is really good. I like these guys. They broke down the analysis of it pretty good. I really liked what was going on with that. So I'm looking at the Reddit here. So I was looking down through here, and they break down what they did for their threat hunting, for the research of what happened here. And right around here, it says, here are the indicators of compromise. And for the cyber threat intel world, IOC, or indicator of compromise, is essentially the thing that we can point to say, if this is found in your network, it's an indicator that you have been compromised. That's kind of the key word behind that. So this is the interesting thing. It says here, attackers uploaded agent.crt. So in Windows, they have certain executables that bad guys like to use that are already in Windows. And they call this living off the land. That's what they call this type of attack, because you're actually not having to take an extra step of trying to obfuscate a download of a tool or a DLL or an exploitable executable from a different location. You don't have to download an encryptor for the ransomware files if you just use what's here. So if you use their tools that they already have built into Microsoft. So there's one tool called CertUtil. And if this particular one here has a switch called decode, and you can rename whatever the executable is, but essentially what they've done here is the CRT extension is for that, this CertUtil, which is for checking certificates and validity of certificates and such. But apparently they actually stuff this particular file. Let's look down here. CertDXC, right here, agent.exe is what they named it from CertUtil. So originally it was called agent.crt. And then from looking at the logs here, it looks like they did a cert decode, and then they renamed it to agent.exe right there. And then it deleted whatever the original CRT was, it looks like there. And this agent.exe is the actual encryptor. Now, their goal in doing these sort of things is to try to evade detection, because these are like CertUtil. These are Windows signed binaries that are actually included in Windows. So they're not considered to be evil, but they can be used to hide or obfuscate things. Now, I have seen at the place I work at that CrowdStrike will see this, and they will see CertUtil -decode, and they'll flag it, and probably even, I think they even stop it immediately, because you have to kind of you have to have the mindset, because there's so many different tools that they can use for living off the land. But you have to have the mindset at your workplace for defense purposes to say, do I have any use for this tool? And if so, do I have any use for the decode function of it? So if I don't have any use in my company for CertUtil, because I don't use it to check certificates or what have you, then disable it. Use AppLocker, use whatever, get rid of it, Don't even allow it to be used in this particular case, because that would have stopped this particular problem here of them using CertUtil. Of course, they would have been crafting, try to find another way, but for this specific one, if you did not have CertUtil running, or he had it blocked in some case, then that would take away that particular step, that mitigated. So the same thing goes with PowerShell. Like a lot of times you'll see like some of these Ryugs and Emotet that we've seen in the past, they like to obfuscate the download of Emotet or download of TrickBot using PowerShell's base64 encoding switch and function. So you have to think to yourself, okay, if this is a pattern, if the last 4 attacks downloaded TrickBot by using an obfuscated PowerShell command using base64, maybe I should think about, do I even have a use? Is there any use case in my workplace for me to base64 encode any of my PowerShell commands? Because if there isn't, and I just run PowerShell commands as normal, then disable the ability to even use that particular command. Or you could disable PowerShell. Now, that could be an issue because a lot of people use it for log-on scripts, things like that. But if you know that the common thing that happens on almost every one of these is PowerShell because of the in-memory attacks that they can do with it, that has to kind of kick in your brain going, man, we really need to rethink. Do we use PowerShell? Do we need it? Is there an alternative? Or if we do we need to use or allow the use of base64 encoding for PowerShell? Because that is the common way they're trying to get their download to not be visible to certain tools, right? Although that doesn't always work, right? Because CrowdStrike and Red Cloak and all these other ones can see that, and they see the string for it, and they can do the base 6040 code. But if you don't have a true EDR solution, it could sneak past, right? So in this case, we're seeing, once again, they're using PowerShell. And you're going to see it over and over and over because it works. It's effective. I've done tabletops at different companies where I've used PowerShell to do in-memory attacks, and it wasn't caught. I ran entire frameworks from PowerShell. There's a particular framework called Red Rabbit, which is a PowerShell framework. And all it's doing is just running a bunch of different PowerShell commands, and I was able to get that running at a particular location that I worked at in the past, and they didn't really catch it at all because it was not seen as malicious because it's just PowerShell. But you can see here what they've done. They disabled real-time monitoring. This is the first thing they would do before any of this happens because they don't want to have this thing being sent to CrowdStrike because CrowdStrike will interact with, like, I'm just using CrowdStrike as an example. There's plenty of other EDR solutions. If you have a different one, Carbon Black or what have you, that's fine. But I'm just using them as an example. Typically what they'll do is with PowerShell, they have this thing called AMSI with Windows Defender. And essentially, if I were to try to download Mimikatz, let's say, at my workplace using PowerShell, it's likely that the AMSI portion of PowerShell will flag that and say, no, you can't do it. We've seen this to be a malicious download. It specifically says that in the error. That is because of the AMSI that's being built there. Now, typically, we'll see that tied with Windows Defender control on that because a lot of people would use Windows Defender for their antivirus or what have you. But if you're using another EDR or another antivirus, Symantec or CrowdStrike or whoever, they'll typically go in there, disable the Windows Defender antivirus portion, and they'll take over, more than likely, that portion of it. So the AMSI messages would then get sent to the EDR instead. So in this particular case, if we can disable that real-time monitoring and not have it actually be picked up by an EDR, that's definitely in the attacker's best interest. Here it says disable intrusion prevention system, and this one here, the AV protection, and then here, disable script scanning. And this is for investigation purposes because with script scanning turned on in the group policy, it will basically record the entirety of what the person ran for scripts, not just portions of it. It will be the entirety of it. So if you enable script scanning, that is a good way for you in the future to do like investigations to figure out, well, how did this attack happen? What scripts were run at what time? This gives you the entirety of it. So they disable that because they don't want that being shown. Looks like here, enable controlled folder access is disabled, network protection. They just basically go in here and turn everything off. And then they run this certutil deal, do the decode of this particular file, change it into .exe, and this now is essentially holding all the decryption tools, apparently. And from there, they were able to actually go ahead through that agent to run a Windows Defender executable. And this Windows Defender executable does actually use a DLL, and we're looking here at this one, for instance. Here's a forum I found of somebody having an issue with this, what they call DLL sideloading. You can see right here, C program files, Windows Defender, MPSVC DLL is infected and should be replaced. So we know that Defender apparently is using this. So what they've done here is they've essentially created their own MPSVSC.dll, and they want to essentially have Windows Defender or this executable load this DLL and not the actual real one. So I'm assuming somewhere along the way here they probably either deleted it or hoping that the executable will run and pick up the DLL that's in the path itself instead of using the full absolute path. So in this particular case, that's where they do DLL sideloading. And this is, again, to avoid detection by DLL sideloading into a regular executable that is a Windows signed binary in this case here. And then here it looks like they did this particular DLL started doing some nasty things about creating registry keys and things of this nature. And here we see some hashes of the malicious content that was noted down as an IOC here. And it looks like this Revil encryptor payload here was part of this DLL that was blasted inside of this agent.exe. So this agent.exe essentially held all of this nonsense here to be able to go ahead and do that, such as this. So this is what actually drops the encryptor onto the machine. in other ransomware situations that don't do something like this, they would have to then make a connection out. Let's say, for instance, they dropped Emotet on there before it was, smashed a little bit by the FBI. But let's say they did that. Emotet would do a PowerShell obfuscated base64 encoded download outside to the internet of a dropper that would have the encryption tools or the encryption keys. So typically these would be held in a different location, maybe what's called a C2, and this is where they would actually get all their different encryption keys for that. And sometime later I'm going to do a video where we actually kind of go over that and maybe make a simple one or something like that. That'd be a good one to throw out. But essentially that's what's going on here. This is doing the actual encryption stuff that they're going to use in this particular case here. They do have a detection tool that they put out, and it's on the FBI guidance page. It's on Kaseya's webpage, and all MSPs should be using this particular tool to determine whether or not they are compromised. I guess it would be safe to say, because this is specific to this VSA, that if your MSP does not use this software, I suppose you could say we shouldn't have an issue. Because again, it seems to be pretty targeted to this specific one. Now, we don't know if other ones will be that way, because this has happened before, I believe even to this company, as they've done this before with other MSP stuff here. I don't know if it was this particular software, but I know they've done VSA compromise before for other different ones here. What was it? Ragnar Locker, I think, was one. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. So in this particular case, the ransomware that they're putting out originally was $70 million for the ransomware in Bitcoin. That's a heck of a lot of money right there. And they recently, from my understanding from researching yesterday, is they dropped this down to about 50 mil right now. So I'm guessing there are some people that are saying, nope, we're not paying it. Or they have contacted the FBI in quick enough time that maybe the FBI is getting this Bitcoin back for them, kind of like what they did with the Colonial Pipeline. So maybe they realize that and they're thinking, oh, yeah, let's drop it down a little bit here. Maybe nobody's going to be willing to pay. And that's what I can't understand about these attackers. It's like, if I were going to do this properly as a bad guy, I would try to infect as many as I could. I'd be more concerned about how many I can infect different companies and different MSPs, and then not have this outrageous demand of money, a decent amount of money, but have it enough where I know it's in their budget to be able to pay it. And if I do that for 50 of them, I will essentially get up to 70 million, but I do it in small chunks. I can't understand this blanket just drop 70 million for everybody kind of deal, man, because I just, that's a lot of money. I don't think any of these companies are really budgeted for this sort of thing, but it is what it is. Either way, so this Kaseya thing is a real deal. It's a real thing. I would say in your cases, if they have a guidance right here from the FBI, is if you're MSP, or if you are an MSP, the recommendation from CISA and FBI is to first get this detection tool to analyze and see if you have any of these indicators of compromise. Enable MFA, which should be already enabled. If not, you have some other bigger problems than this. And implement allow listing to limit communication with remote monitoring management capabilities. They're also saying if you have your VSA servers or monitoring servers, to shut them down until a full patch is put out. Place administrative interfaces of RMM behind a virtual private network. So basically network segmented off so it's not affecting as, they're trying to limit how much this is going to affect. And apparently it's been working pretty good, because I think there was no, it's not in this one. There was a graphic that showed that those that were following these plans, it was starting to slow down the roll here, or the spread of this particular one here. Now, if you're a customer and you do have an MSP, it'd be wise to contact them to verify, hey, do you actually use this software? Do you know if you're infected? Have you run this detection tool? Those sort of things. It'd be wise for you to reach out to them. Now, on your own side, because again, it's a supply chain, so it could already have infected you. This one here, again, can't stress it enough. Backups. Ensure they're up to date, and ensure what? That you have restored those. You have to do your tests. Make sure it's working copy. You don't want to find out too little too late that the copies that you had are not working. They're corrupt or whatever. So definitely put that into your plan immediately to do a test restore of your backups. And I can't stress enough, off-site backups, because this online stuff is just, they're going to encrypt it. They're just too crafty. They stay in there so long and learn where everything goes, and then they add those paths into their actual coding of their tool. So I'm telling you, off-site backup, important. Revert to a manual patch management, because they believe obviously that an automated push would be where like with the SolarWinds thing, that was kind of the issue there, is that everybody had set it up as an automatically get this update to Orion software. In this case, they're saying, hey, just to make sure, don't do an automated push of this, because you may get to a VSA server that has been infected, and we don't want that automatically pushed. So this is a manual patch process until new patches become available. And again, MFA, least privilege on key network resource admin accounts, those sort of things, to try to limit the role of this. And of course, if you have an EDR, hopefully it'll catch the cert util business that was going on there, and then stop it dead in its tracks. We're hoping. But again, if they were successful in turning off the monitoring and the script scanning and all that kind of stuff, you never know if the EDR will be able to actually see that, right? Because they're tied in directly with that sort of thing there. Now, they are obviously, FBI and CISA are obviously getting hammered with all these different calls. So if your company has been compromised and you're looking to see if they can get the money back if you do pay it, which I always recommend not paying, because it does set a pattern and it does encourage more of this behavior. That's just my mindset. Obviously, I can't put myself in your shoes. You may be critical hospital data or something like that, and you just realize too little too late that you haven't tested the restore of your backups and you haven't done the proper social engineering training, what have you. Then I guess if you have no other choice, you would pay it. But in my general principle mind, I would say do not pay ransom, because it only encourages more of this behavior, and you cannot guarantee that they're going to send you a decrypted key. And if they do, you can't guarantee it's going to decrypt all of your files. They're criminals for crying out loud. So you can't expect them to be held true to their word, right? In this particular case, get the money and run. So in this case here, again, they give you a place where you can report your incident here, but do be aware that there is probably a lot of people that are hammering them with this, and so they'll take it in stride, I suppose. But ransomware is a big thing, huge thing these days, because it works and because people keep paying. If they didn't keep paying, it would then not be as effective for the bad guy to do a ransomware, because they just can't guarantee that people will pay it, or it'll force them to lower their demands as far as how much it gets paid, because they're seeing a pattern of people just not paying. So to have that ability to say, no, we're not paying, test restore of your off-site backups. I'm again going to hammer that. I'm just going to hammer that until I'm blue in the face. And again, the social engineering training is very important, but we can assume that humans being humans, that somebody is going to click an email, they're going to download a document, the phish document, malware injected document. So it may also be wise to look into some sort of email sandboxing solution. If you use an O365, I know there's an E5 license in just for a security portion. I don't think you have to pay for the entirety of it. I could be wrong, but I don't think you have to pay for the entirety of E5 license. And I think you can still have your E3, but then add on the E5 security, because what that one brings is the Windows sandboxing ability. And you can say that all emails in O365 or attachments that get opened are going to be opened up in a sandboxed environment, a virtualized environment, which means that kind of limits the spread of where the damage is going to be in this particular case, and we won't necessarily have to worry about it infecting and doing worm-like capabilities. So that would be a consideration, is some sort of email sandbox. And I don't know too many other vendors. I just know about the O365 one, but there are some vendors out there that do email sandboxing. So that may be wise to do, because those are going to be your two main things to really look at. And the other thing is the PowerShell and the cert util and the live off the land binaries. You need to kind of take stock of your environment and say, listen, we see this being used numerous times in ransomware. So we can automatically assume that the next ransomware attack is going to use the same tactics, because there's a thing they call pyramid of pain, and the pyramid of pain symbolizes how much pain it will cause an attacker at what level. And at the very tippity top of this pyramid is called TTPs, techniques, tactics, and procedures. And essentially, what it's saying is that attackers are not as willing to change their techniques, tactics, and procedures if it's been working all of this time, because it's a pain to try for an attacker to try to figure a new method or new way to do the original attack the way they originally had done it, if they have to change their tactics and techniques and procedures entirely. So it's a pain to them, and they don't want to do that. So if they continually keep using the same thing, they keep downloading via PowerShell obfuscated commands, they keep using certutil decode to store these files and then change them and drop them using these living off the land binaries, you have to kind of take stock of your network system and say, listen, guys, what do we actually need and what don't we need? If we don't need PowerShell for this, this, and this, or base64 encoding, can we disable it, that portion of it? If we don't use certutil because we use another thing to do certificate checking or whatever, can we disable it? Because it's being used on 1,500 other ransomware attacks that we've seen. Look and see what you're using and what the actual indicators are that we see from this sort of attacks, and then try to put a stop to it immediately to be able to go ahead and mitigate any further problems coming out. Because if you don't get the actual ransomware on your machines to begin with, it's kind of hard for them to drop a little C2 on there and drop a little encryptor to be able to do that. And also the outbound monitoring as well, because a lot of these don't use this technique, that may not use this technique. They may have to actually contact a external server that they host all of the encryption tools on and download those to the victim machine. And it's a little bit difficult because, again, you're coming from inside a trusted network out. So a stateful firewall may not flag some of those things, but what it should flag, your firewall, if you have it set up properly, is that the person inside the network is trying to connect to a known ban list C2 IP address. So combining your threat intelligence tools with your, what they call SOAR capability here, with your firewall, for instance, to put these indicators of compromises and these lists out there saying, okay, well, it's coming from inside, going out, we're going to trust it. Oh, wait a minute, no, wait. This is a known C2 emotet IP address, and we're going to ban it. We're going to stop this request here altogether. So there's a lot of different things you can do to try to prevent this thing that involves things like cyber threat intel, but there's also things that you can do as far as the different teams that work at your place. Now, again, it's not going to be something that's enjoyable for Windows teams or Linux teams or what have you, because, again, it's taken away some things they've used all the time. Same thing with RDP. People are saying, well, I kind of need RDP because I do this and that. Well, okay, well, that's fine, but they're selling RDP accounts that were found in this massive dump list, selling for like $3 over on the dark web. So if people use those particular RDP credentials for your company and they're able to log in, there it is. Because you have to remember this mindset. A defender has to be right every time. An attacker can be wrong 1,000,000 times, and only one time has it worked that they can cause all of this damage. So an attacker only needs one time to make everything work. A defender, on the other hand, has to be right every single time, and that's difficult. Almost near impossible in most cases, but if you're doing the proper things to protect yourself, it shouldn't be as big of an issue. So that is the Kayesa, if I'm saying it right, attack, and in later ones, we'll try to keep up to date with some different things like the print nightmare exploit. We'll probably do that one next, and then we'll use MITRE ATT&CK, and we'll kind of look through how to set up a preventative plan for things like Ryuk and Revil and Emotet and TrickBot and things like that. Things that we've seen commonly by using the information from the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And it'd be pretty awesome. So until next time, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Check out my YouTube as well for other videos. I do a video series where I break into, I hack into CTFs, capture the flags, war games, and teach security concepts with that. It's called Pop, 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 another server drop. And then I have a bug bounty training one where I go into some different web application specific attacks and talk about that for your bug bounty goodness that you may participate in. And then I have another one called Don't Be a Tool, where I go over some different security tooling, like Nmap and Burp Suite and Metasploit, things like that. And we talk about those sort of things as well. So check it out on there. And of course, this one, the new series here called Intel Bytez, where I go over some different things for cyber threat intel, privacy, OSint, and those sort of things. So until next time, peace out, players.